Across the vast expanse of the galaxy, the Imperium of Verac declared a challenge that would echo through every corner of known space. The message was simple, yet terrifying in its scope. We are the Imperium. We are the greatest. Come forth, humanity, and prove you deserve to exist. The Veracians were an ancient and nearly indomitable empire, feared by all who crossed their path. Their soldiers were genetic marvels, engineered for combat, ruthlessness, and dominance. Their warriors, known as the Immortals, were practically invincible, giants of muscle, speed, and intellect. They had never met an adversary who could match them, let alone defeat them. To challenge such a power was madness, or so it seemed. The Imperium, in its arrogance, declared a duel, a battle of champions. The terms were clear. One representative from each side would fight to the death, in the presence of galactic witnesses. The victor would decide the fate of the galaxy. If humanity won, the Imperium would withdraw and leave the contested planets in peace. If the Imperium won, humanity would surrender, their resources and planets claimed as spoils. Across the galaxy, the humans of the Terran coalition were left in stunned silence. The call was audacious, even absurd. The Terrans had no immortals. They had no genetically engineered warriors bred for battle. What they had were men and women from every walk of life. Engineers, farmers, scientists, and soldiers. People who had survived against impossible odds simply by outthinking, outworking, and never giving up. The Council of Terran leaders convened in a hurry, knowing their response could either save their world or doom them all. No one was sure who would take on the Veracian challenge. After all, it was one thing to have a highly trained military, but how could anyone hope to defeat a race of living weapons? Hours passed, filled with tense debate. The generals proposed one of their best soldiers. The diplomats spoke of alliances. And then, from the back of the room, a voice spoke up. It was rough, with a noticeable edge of sarcasm, but it carried weight in the room. "I'll do it." Joanna Mercer, a mechanic from a mining freighter, stood at the back of the council chamber. Her clothes were oil-stained, her hands calloused from years of fixing engines and welding starships. She wasn't a soldier, a commander, or even someone with any combat experience. She wasn't anyone's idea of a hero, but that's exactly why she chose to speak up. "I've fixed engines bigger than their warriors. I'll fix this too. Just give me a wrench and a moment." The room fell silent. The eyes of the council shifted between one another, and then to her. There were no cheers, no applause, only a sense of disbelief. Joanna Mercer, a woman who could barely keep her temper in check while dealing with broken machinery, was their champion. Was this some kind of joke? But Jo didn't flinch. She didn't need to prove anything to them. "The Empire sends their best, and we send a mechanic. Sounds about right." She gave a small smirk. "Let's see how it works out." The Terran Council could hardly believe what had just happened. They had hoped for a military tactician, an experienced soldier, someone capable of matching the terrifying might of the Veracian immortal. What they got was Joanna Mercer, mechanic, troublemaker, and the least likely candidate imaginable. Jo wasn't exactly a stranger to the spotlight, but that was mostly because she had a reputation for causing trouble in the engineering bays of the fleet's ships. If something was broken, Jo would fix it, but only after making it more broken in the process, often by improvising repairs in ways that no one else dared to. The thought of her representing humanity in a life-or-death battle against an unstoppable force seemed ludicrous. But Jo wasn't here for their doubts or their expectations. The whole situation, in fact, felt like one big broken system to her, a machine that needed a little bit of tweaking. She had spent her entire life in the depths of ships, figuring out how to make things work when everyone else thought they were beyond saving. This was no different. "I don't need armor or fancy weapons," she had said to the council with the same nonchalant tone that she used when discussing a malfunctioning exhaust valve. "I just need a wrench and some time to figure out what's wrong with their warrior." Her words were bold, almost reckless, But something in her voice gave the council pause. They had expected a soldier to be humble, to grasp at whatever tools they could find to stay alive. But Jo wasn't trying to stay alive. She was trying to win. The battle was scheduled to take place on an arena moon orbiting a dead planet, an old relic from an ancient war. The location itself was designed to be a testament to the Empire's might, a grand structure built into the side of a mountain, surrounded by a vast field of rocky terrain. It was everything the Varakian Empire wanted. A stage for their champion to perform, a place where strength was the only thing that mattered. When Jo arrived at the arena, it was as if the very air around her was charged with the electric buzz of disbelief. Her colleagues and the spectators were not sure what to expect, but all eyes were on her as she walked into the heart of the battlefield. She was dressed in her work overalls, grease stains still visible from the days before, and she had her signature wrench slung over her shoulder. It was a tool meant for fixing things, not breaking them. Yet in her hands, it was a promise that she could fix even this. The Varakian champion, a massive towering warrior clad in gleaming armor, was waiting for her on the other side of the arena. His features were hidden beneath the mask of his helmet, but his body radiated menace. He was the epitome of power and perfection, everything that the Imperium stood for. As he stepped forward, the ground seemed to tremble beneath him. He sneered at Jo's unassuming appearance, his voice booming through the arena's sound system. Is this the best humanity can offer? A mere mechanic. His words were cold, dismissive. Your fate was sealed the moment you accepted. Jo didn't flinch. She didn't even acknowledge him at first. Instead, she surveyed the surroundings with the intensity of someone sizing up a broken engine. Every stone, every support beam, every piece of equipment was just another part of the machine she intended to fix or break, depending on how you looked at it. With a quiet, almost amused grin, she said under her breath, "Let's get to work." The arena was a sight to behold, an ancient, colossal structure built into the side of a barren mountain, its jagged peaks towering like sentinels over the vast, empty plains. This was where the greatest battles of the galaxy had been fought, and now it would be the stage for humanity's greatest gamble. For all its grandeur, the arena carried an ominous weight. The air felt thick, tense, as if it could crack under the pressure of what was about to unfold. Joanna Mercer, mechanic from the Terran Coalition, stood at the edge of the battlefield. The soft hum of the arena's energy shields buzzed in her ears as she took in the vast expanse. On one side of the arena stood the Varakian champion, a mountain of a man clad in radiant, golden armor. His helmet reflected the harsh light of the arena's artificial suns, casting a shadow over the ground. He was a living weapon, every inch of him designed for war. His chest plate alone was as thick as a starship hull, and his boots left deep imprints in the sand with every step. And on the other side, Jo stood alone, wearing her oil-stained overalls and carrying nothing but a wrench. She looked absurd next to the towering figure of her opponent. Her entire demeanor screamed misfit, not the kind of image you would expect from a champion about to face down a god of battle. The crowd of alien spectators, who had gathered from every corner of the galaxy to witness this spectacle, let out a collective murmur of disbelief. Their laughter was cold, mocking. They were here to watch the inevitable defeat of a primitive species, but it seemed their amusement was growing. Humanity's champion was a joke, a woman with nothing but a tool in her hand against a monster made for war. The announcer's voice echoed across the arena, setting the rules and the stakes. The battle will commence in 5 minutes. No surrender, no retreat. The winner shall decide the fate of their people. Jo didn't listen. Her eyes scanned the surroundings, calculating, analyzing every inch of the battlefield. To anyone watching, it might have looked like she was trying to mentally prepare for a fight she had no chance of winning. But to her, it was a puzzle. Every arena had its flaws, weak points, hidden traps, structures ready to be manipulated. She wasn't here to fight head-on. She was here to break the system, to turn the odds in her favor. The Varakian's voice boomed again, this time laced with contempt. "You are nothing more than a mechanic, human. You will fall just like the rest of your kind." Jo didn't even look at him. She wasn't interested in his words. Instead, she reached down to adjust the wrench slung over her shoulder, tightening her grip on it. The weight of it felt comforting in her hand. She had used this same tool to repair starships, patch up engines, and tighten bolts that had been lost in the chaos of space. Today, however, it would serve a different purpose. The countdown began, and the silence of the arena thickened. Jo's pulse was steady, her mind laser-focused. This wasn't about strength. This wasn't about speed. It was about intelligence, resourcefulness, and the ability to make something work when everyone else thought it was beyond saving. The moment the bell rang, the Varakian surged forward, a storm of fury and power. His massive frame tore through the sand, his footfalls shaking the ground beneath him. But Jo, calm as ever, stepped aside with an almost lazy ease. She didn't need to face him directly. She didn't need to match his raw strength. She just needed to outsmart him. The Varakian champion was a tidal wave of destruction, and he surged forward with a speed that could have crushed a normal opponent in an instant. His massive fists hammered the ground as he approached, the force of each step shaking the very foundation of the arena. The ground beneath his feet cracked, and the air around him seemed to warp with the power of his presence. He was an unstoppable force, a living weapon designed to wreak havoc. Jo Mercer, however, was not impressed. She didn't flinch, didn't recoil in fear. She had seen worse. She had fixed engines after they had been smashed to pieces by asteroid collisions. She had repaired ships after they had been ravaged by space debris. She knew what pressure looked like, and this was just another challenge to solve. With a swift motion, Jo sidestepped the Varakian's first strike, her eyes darting over the battlefield like a hawk spotting its prey. The immortal's fist slammed into the sand, sending shockwaves that cracked the ground beneath him. But Jo wasn't there anymore. She had already moved, sliding to the left with the ease of someone who had spent her entire life dodging grease traps and malfunctioning equipment. The crowd let out a collective gasp. They hadn't expected such speed, such agility, from someone who looked so out of place in a battle like this. Jo didn't just dodge, though. She observed. Every movement of the immortal, every swing of his arm, every strike he attempted, was like a note in a song. Jo was listening, analyzing, and understanding the rhythm of his battle. She saw the flaw in his attack, a slight delay in his next punch, where his momentum would cause him to stumble just for a fraction of a second. That was all the time Jo needed. The Varakian lunged again, his massive frame moving with terrifying grace. But this time, Jo didn't dodge. She didn't need to. Instead, she stepped forward, rolling beneath his swinging fist, and reached up with her wrench. In one smooth motion, she slammed it into the ground beneath the immortal's feet. The wrench connected with the control panel embedded in the arena floor, triggering a hidden mechanism that was built into the arena's design, but had long been forgotten by most. Jo had studied the arena's schematics before entering the fight, and now it was paying off. A series of pressure plates shifted beneath the immortal's feet, and suddenly, a section of the battlefield, directly under the Varakian's massive weight, collapsed. The crowd gasped in shock as the Varakian staggered, his feet no longer firmly planted on the ground. The sand beneath him gave way, and the immortal fell to one knee, momentarily thrown off balance. He roared in anger, trying to recover, but Jo wasn't done. The moment he started to rise, she swung the wrench again, this time aiming for one of the massive pillars that supported the arena's grand structure. The pillar groaned under the impact. The Varakian's movements slowed as he tried to regain his footing, distracted by the rumble of the structure above him. Jo wasn't fighting him directly. She was using his strength against him, turning the arena itself into her weapon. Another swing, another crack in the structure. And then, without warning, the ground beneath the immortal cracked wide open, sending a wave of dust and debris through the air. He was still standing, But for the first time, it was clear he wasn't invincible. Joe's wrench had found its mark. The immortal growled in frustration, his massive fists slamming into the ground as he tried to regain his balance. He was a living weapon, designed for destruction, yet here he was, struggling against a mechanic armed only with a wrench. The arena was no longer a place of pure combat. It was a broken machine, and Joe was its mechanic. Every time the Varakian tried to strike, she found a way to make him pay for his arrogance. Every move he made was another opportunity for Joe to exploit. The ground beneath him continued to shift, cracking and splitting as Joe swung her wrench with precision. The immortal, despite his size and strength, was becoming more and more unsteady. His armor, once gleaming and impenetrable, was starting to show signs of wear. Sparks flew from his joints with every movement, and the once smooth surface of his breastplate was now dented and scratched. Joe wasn't just breaking his armor, she was breaking his will. She wasn't fighting with brute force. She was using her knowledge of machinery to dismantle him, piece by piece. As the immortal took another step forward, Joe noticed something, a faint whirring sound coming from his chest plate. It was subtle, but it was there. The power supply to his suit was unstable. Joe's eyes narrowed. She knew that sound. It was the same noise a failing reactor made just before it short-circuited. She grinned, a flash of determination crossing her face. This was her moment. Joe sprinted forward, using the crumbling arena as cover. The immortal swung a fist in her direction, but she ducked under it, sliding beneath his legs and coming up behind him in one fluid motion. The arena floor trembled beneath her, but she didn't hesitate. With a swift motion, she climbed onto his back, avoiding the thrashing of his limbs. Her hands went straight to the exposed panel on the back of his armor, the one that controlled his power systems. She had seen it before, and now she would exploit it. The immortal let out a bellow of rage, his massive hands grasping at her, but Joe was faster. Her wrench moved with practiced ease, prying open the control panel and exposing the power core. She could feel the heat radiating from it, and she knew that every second counted. The Varakian struggled, but Joe was already at work. She twisted a set of wires, manipulating the power grid with the same deftness she used when rewiring starship engines. Sparks flew as she shorted out the connections, and for a moment, everything went still. The immortal froze, his body jerking, as if the power supply to his suit had failed. His once intimidating presence now looked fragile. With a final twist of her wrench, Joe slammed the panel shut, locking it in place. The immortal's entire system started to short-circuit, his movements sluggish and erratic. His chest plate whined in protest, and then, with a deafening crack, the suit's power grid exploded in a shower of sparks. The immortal stumbled backward, his once imposing frame now struggling to stay upright. He tried to raise his arms, but his power suit was dead. The mighty warrior, reduced to a hulking, vulnerable mess, collapsed to one knee, his armor now useless. Joe stood there, panting slightly, but with a look of quiet satisfaction. She had done it. The immortal's strength was nothing without his power, and now he was no more dangerous than a broken machine. The crowd watched in stunned silence, as if they couldn't quite believe what they were seeing. The Terran mechanic, Joanna Mercer, had taken down the Empire's greatest warrior, not with brute force, but with knowledge, precision, and the sheer will to win. Joe wiped the sweat from her brow, resting her wrench on her shoulder. The immortal was down. The fight wasn't over yet, but she had just delivered the first real blow. The Varakian champion was kneeling before her now, his once mighty form trembling as sparks flickered from the ruined power core embedded in his chest plate. Joe stood a few feet away, still gripping her wrench with steady hands. The crowd's silence was deafening. They were watching a moment they would never forget. The fall of a giant, brought low by a mechanic who had no business being here. The immortal's breathing was labored, and his body trembled from the strain of his power grid failing. His once mighty armor was now a hollow shell, barely functioning. The arrogance that had once been etched into his every movement was gone, replaced by confusion and vulnerability. He tried to rise, his massive hands pressing into the sand, but his legs buckled under him. Without the power of his suit, he was just a man, no different from the humans he had once considered beneath him. Jo wasn't finished, though. She wasn't about to give him the satisfaction of dying in battle. No, this was her moment, not just to defeat him, but to show the galaxy that humanity was more than just survival. They were capable of doing the impossible, of thinking in ways the so-called gods of war could never fathom. She advanced toward him, her boots crunching in the sand with each step. Her eyes never left his face. No more mocking, no more threats, just the cold reality that he had lost. And now, she would finish it, but she was no killer. She didn't want to take a life. The immortal had come here with every intention of destroying her, but Jo wasn't interested in murder. She was here to break the cycle of destruction, to put an end to the Empire's reign of terror with intelligence, not blood. "You wanted a fight," Jo said, her voice clear and unwavering. "But you didn't think we'd be able to think our way out of this, did you?" The immortal's gaze met hers, his eyes filled with a mix of rage and realization. He was defeated, but his pride was not so easily broken. "You may have won this battle, human, but this war will continue. You cannot change the fate of your people." Jo chuckled softly, the sound almost dismissive. "The war isn't over because one battle was won. The war ends when the people fighting it stop thinking they can't win." She paused, looking around at the audience, their faces full of disbelief, even awe. "And that's exactly what you didn't count on. You thought you could crush us, erase us, but we're still here. We're not here to be slaves to a machine. We build our own tools. We fix what's broken, and when we face something we can't fix, we find a way to make it work anyway." The immortal's chest plate sparked one last time, and then went silent. His head hung low in defeat. He had no words left. Jo turned her back on him, the wrench resting on her shoulder once more. She didn't need to make a grand gesture or speech. The victory spoke for itself. As she walked away from the crumpled form of the Varakian, the audience, still stunned into silence, began to stir. First, a few murmurs, then whispers of disbelief. And then, as if a switch had been flipped, the roar of applause erupted from the stands. Humanity had done the unthinkable. They had won. Jo paused, her eyes scanning the crowd. She didn't need their praise. She didn't need anything from them except the knowledge that she had fought with everything she had, and that, in the end, it was enough. The roar of the crowd echoed through the arena, an overwhelming wave of sound. It was a sound Jo had never expected to hear when she first set foot on this battlefield. It was one thing to face an impossible challenge. It was another to be recognized for overcoming it. She wasn't sure what was louder, the cheers or the pounding of her own heart, which was racing from the adrenaline of the fight. She paused for a moment, standing at the center of the arena, her back still to the fallen Varakian champion. The cheers didn't matter to her. They were an afterthought. She was just a mechanic who had faced the impossible, and somehow she had come out on top. But in the stillness of that moment, she allowed herself a small, quiet smile. The wrench was still in her hand, the simple tool that had helped her turn the tide of the battle. Her victory wasn't just hers. It was humanity's. It was a message, one that resonated far beyond the confines of the arena. The galaxy had just witnessed something that no one could have predicted. A single human, unarmed and outmatched, had taken down the finest warrior of the Varakian Empire using nothing but her intellect, her grit, and a wrench. The message was clear. Humans could fight back. They could stand toe-to-toe with the greatest threats in the universe. But as the cheers continued, Jo knew this moment wouldn't last forever. The applause was for her now, but soon, the people would expect more. The Varakian Empire, humiliated by their champion's defeat, would regroup. There would be those who saw this victory as an anomaly, something that would never happen again. And they would try to stamp out humanity before they could grow too bold. Jo could already hear the whispers of a new threat rising in the distance, as the announcer's voice boomed across the arena, attempting to restore some semblance of order. Joe's thoughts drifted to what lay ahead. This battle had been won, but the war was far from over. The Varakians would never allow this defeat to go unanswered. The galaxy would never let humanity forget that they had dared to challenge the status quo. And Joe, she wasn't ready to stop fighting. Turning back to the Varakian, still on his knees, she spoke, her voice calm but firm. "Get up," she said. "You may have lost today, but I'm not here to finish you off. I'm here to show you that the fight isn't just about power. It's about who's willing to change the game." The immortal, his face twisted in frustration, lifted his head slightly. He didn't speak, but there was something in his eyes, a flicker of something that might have been respect, if he had been able to admit it. He struggled, trying to rise to his feet, but his body was still weak, his suit broken beyond repair. Joe didn't wait for him to recover. She turned her back to him and started walking toward the edge of the arena. Behind her, the Varakian was left to lick his wounds, but the crowd wasn't looking at him anymore. They were looking at her. Humanity's champion had spoken, and her words carried more weight than any blade or piece of armor. She had not only defeated the Varakian, she had struck a blow for every person who had ever been told they weren't strong enough, smart enough, or capable enough to fight back. And the galaxy was listening. As Joe exited the arena, the cheers followed her, and for the first time, she didn't feel like the misfit mechanic. She felt like a symbol of what humanity could become, what they would become. And this was just the beginning. As Joe walked away from the arena, the roar of the crowd faded into the distance, but the weight of the moment stayed with her. She didn't look back, not even once. Her heart was still pounding, but the adrenaline was starting to wear off, leaving her with an odd mix of exhaustion and exhilaration. She had done what no one thought was possible, but in the end, it was only the beginning. She knew that. The corridors leading from the arena were long and dimly lit, a stark contrast to the blinding lights of the battlefield. There were no cheers here, just the quiet hum of machinery and the occasional whisper of someone passing by. Joe didn't mind the silence. It gave her time to think, time to process everything that had just happened. She had won, yes, but what did that truly mean? Her mind raced with the implications. The Varakian Empire would not let this go. They would regroup. They would retaliate. But it wasn't just the Varakians she had to worry about. There were other factions, other empires, each just as eager to maintain their superiority over humanity. One victory wasn't enough to change the balance of power in the galaxy. No, Joe knew that much. This would not be a single battle in a war that stretched far beyond the arena. This was just the first step. But still, she had made a statement. Humanity had made a statement. The Terran Coalition had sent one person, a mechanic, of all things, to face the greatest warrior the galaxy had ever known. And that one person had emerged victorious. It was a message, loud and clear. Humanity was no longer willing to cower in the shadows of the empires that ruled the stars. They had teeth, and they weren't afraid to bite. Joe rounded a corner and stepped into a small, nondescript room, her destination. There, standing against the wall, was Commander Zane Bishop, the leader of the Terran Coalition's forces, and the man who had sent her to this arena in the first place. His expression was unreadable, his arms crossed over his chest, but the faintest glimmer in his eyes told Joe everything she needed to know. He was proud. Proud of her. Proud of what humanity had just accomplished. "You did it," Bishop said, his voice low but laced with an unmistakable hint of admiration. Joe nodded, wiping the sweat from her brow. "Yeah, I did, but this is far from over." He tilted his head, his gaze sharp. "You've made your mark. The galaxy won't forget today." "I don't want them to forget," Joe replied, her tone unwavering. "But we can't rest on our laurels. We're going to need more than one mechanic with a wrench to win this war." Bishop's lips curled into a small smile. "That's exactly why you're here, Joe. You've proven what humanity can do when pushed to the edge. Now we need to push further. We need to show them that we won't just survive. We'll dominate." Jo didn't respond right away. She simply stared at the wall for a moment, letting his words sink in. She had always known that humanity had potential, but this was something different. They had just stepped into the arena of the gods, and they had shown that they could play the game. The question now was, how far were they willing to go? "We're just getting started," Jo said at last, her voice steady. "And I'm ready for whatever comes next." As she turned to leave, she could feel the weight of her victory, but it wasn't a burden. It was a challenge to do more, to go farther, and to make sure that humanity's place in the galaxy wasn't just as a survivor, but as a force to be reckoned with. The future was uncertain, but one thing was clear: humanity had just made its mark, and they weren't going anywhere.